Hello, Line Podcast listeners. It is June the 21st, 2024. Jen Gerson back in Calgary, and we're going to talk with her in just a moment about what it is like to be back in the land of the parched. But coming up in this episode, kind of federal wrap-up. Bill C-59, Han Dong, maybe some vindication for him. We're talking by-elections, polling, leader speculation, all that good stuff. We're also going to talk some provincial stuff from both Jen and I, a bit of an update on our respective corners of this pretty little federation of ours. And Anita Anand, she made a really good point about a problem and then proposed a really bad solution for it. All that and more on the latest episode of the Line Podcast.
This episode of The Line has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Canada can be a global leader in reducing the harm caused by smoking, but it requires actionable steps, including giving adult smokers the information they need to choose potentially less harmful alternatives. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.
Well, Jen, welcome home. I am delighted that you apparently had a very restful vacation. I am extremely delighted you were back in a place that has reliable
Although
Wi-Fi
it is Calgary,
and bandwidth.
It is
like being
Calgary,
back
so
in Calgary?
we can't rely on too much basic infrastructure around here. So no, Calgary's actually lovely. We don't have a heat wave like you guys do. It actually remains an actually very cool spring, which is making me sad inside. Our lilacs are still blooming. My pansies are going crazy, which is usually a bad sign for summer. But no, we remain under water restrictions, and we'll be under water restrictions now till probably the 5th of July. They think they can get this water main repaired before Stampede, but at this point, I don't think anyone is taking any bets on how much longer this is going to go on. And we have a mayor who's chastising us for, or either praising us like children for using radically less water than we are accustomed to, or chastising us for cutting it too close to the line. And also lots of people on Twitter reminding us that people on reserves and people in the depths of certain types of third world nations don't have access to water, so therefore we have nothing to be really unhappy about or ungrateful about. So that's always a fun tone to be getting.
You know what? Count our blessings. Always be grateful for what you have. Always be mindful. Like, I think that's good political advice. I think it's good personal advice. I think it's good professional advice. But I also think at a point, there's a difference between counting your blessings and excusing the fact that Canada's fourth largest city does not currently have access to drinking water.
We have access to drinking water here, Matt.
I like the way I said it.
Yeah, it's wrong though, because like I can open the taps right now and water will come out. I have access to drinking water. Okay, so I can take a brief shower. I can wash my clothes. I know.
You're so spoiled.
So no, we just have to restrict our water usage and pull things back. It's not like the taps are dry right now. They're not. However, I would say this. I don't think it is unreasonable for people in a first world country to expect first world amenities, especially when they pay first world tax. I don't think that that's an unreasonable set of expectations. And I think trying to bring down expectations to what are traditionally associated with third world amenities is a really galling way to deflect from accountability. And by the way,
I'm looking forward to the family photo album you'll have of your kids walking back from the river
of water.
with buckets of water balanced on their head.
And we're paying quite a lot of money for the privilege of not being in such a situation. That being said, I would also extend that position to a long-standing belief that belief extends to, of course, to First Nations people in our nation who still don't have access to clean drinking water and still live under boil water advisories. I would extend that position outward to say that's also not acceptable in a first world country and continues to be not acceptable in a first world country. So I don't think trying to excuse or deflect from the clear screw up that has led to this water main failure by saying, well, at least, you're not carrying water on your back like a bucket, like that poor woman in whatever. I don't think that that's a great look. I don't think it's a great excuse.
The difference between humility and having any standard.
That's, I think, a very good way to put it. But anyway, I don't mean to bitch about Calgary because, like I said, I do have access to running water in my tap right now. So really, what do I have to complain about?
when did you get back? Because you were out on the coast for a
I
couple
actually
weeks.
got back.
When did you actually get back?
6-week death march of stuff prior to that, but I got back yesterday, the day before Wednesday. I got back on Wednesday, so I've been back for about a day and a half now.
Can I observe with love, affection, and admiration that you are like the moment we connected today, I could tell you were in a better mood.
That's what's that. Yeah, I mean, I do really love the coast. I love BC, and
I just mean like you had 6 weeks of one.
Yeah, it was
event
relentless,
after
and then
another,
and then a family reunion, which was also in its own way relentless. But no, I mean, I love the West Coast. I love the islands. I think that something that we may do in the future is we may actually just try and go down to the islands for a full summer and see if we like being down there for an extended period of time, because it's a really beautiful part of the world. And as I get older, I become more crotchety and less able to handle human connection. So being in a smaller place with fewer people, I think would serve me very well. But anyway, we don't want to talk about my...
Oh, I'll be getting out of Toronto in a matter of hours.
We don't want to talk about my mental illness. So let's get started to talk about the mental illness of the people who lead us. Matt, what's going on? What happened in the week that I was gone when I had limited access to Wi-Fi and cell phone, which was, again, very good for my health?
No, I bet it was. So, all kidding aside, I will answer your question, but all kidding aside, I was at a lunch yesterday, and I hung up my coat because it was just sweltering in Toronto. It was like, it's a formal venue, so you have to show up in like shirt and jacket. But then as soon as I got in, I hung up the jacket. My phone was in my pocket. And then I was in a lunch conversation and I couldn't get to my phone, which sort of was like wigging me out. But also an hour and a half break from your phone was great. Although I did miss the news that Donald Sutherland had died. So that was kind of sad when I went and picked it up. Okay, so what have you missed the last couple of weeks?
The House rose a little early. The House rose. The House of Commons rose and disbanded.
Yeah.
And that was a bit, but that was a bit early, was it not?
Honestly, I don't recall. It's usually around this time. Maybe it's a few days early. I don't think you've missed anything because even though you've had limited telecommunications, we've still been talking. But I think the last couple of weeks, foreign interference has been eating the news cycle. It has been the story. And the NSICOP report that came out now, I guess 3 weeks ago, has really eaten the news cycle. Now, it's now been referred to Commissioner Hogue for the Foreign Interference Commission. I think that's a mistake, but I think it's a politically expedient mistake. And I think right now what's happened is that the major parties, the Conservatives and the Liberals, they've bought themselves a summer because their answer to any question is, well, we've referred it to the Commission. So that I think is a bad thing. I think that's an accountability deflection, but there it is. On the foreign interference front, just something we're mentioning, we're not going to wade into this for obvious reasons, but independent MP Han Dong, who was a Liberal MP until he stepped down from caucus after a series of allegations, he had been pursuing a lawsuit against Global News. For disclosure, I used to work there, and specifically against reporter Sam Cooper. Global filed what was called a anti-SLAPP motion against the lawsuit. I don't want to get bogged down in the legalities, but certain provinces have adopted legislation that basically allows people or defendants to short-circuit lawsuits. They can demonstrate that it's a lawsuit that is intended to stifle participation in public debate. Global had made a motion to have Han Dong's lawsuit struck down on that basis and lost. Now, I think this is being overreacted to. I think this is being held up as a vindication of Han Dong, which, by the way, it may ultimately be. I'm not prejudging the outcome of what a full lawsuit will be, but I think people need to understand what a SLAPP motion is. The court looks at it and decides, does the plaintiff have kind of any grounds upon which they may be successful? There are many ways to prove defamation or slander or whatever the terminology is. And if the court thinks that any one of them is viable, it will proceed from that point. So what has been ruled here is not that Han Dong wins, it's that he's got a fair shot at trial. And my read on that is probably
and I think that's correct. So it's entirely possible here, and maybe even plausible, that Han Dong would win the anti-SLAPP motion, but will lose at trial when the defamation case is tried. And that's a very possible and even plausible outcome given the circumstances. Personally, I'm not at all surprised that Global would lose the anti-SLAPP because I think that Hendong does have grounds for his court procedure. Whether or not grounds doesn't necessarily mean that he's right or that he will win against defamation, but he's got legitimate grounds. I don't think that he brought forward this suit in order to try and shut Global up. I don't think that that is what's in evidence here. I think he brought forward the suit because he really genuinely felt that the stories that Global published about him damaged his reputation, which they absolutely undoubtedly did. So
no, I think this is a scenario, Jen, where this is one of those things where I think most people, most of the time, would prefer to avoid litigation, but there are matters, whether criminal or civil, that can only be effectively remedied by turning to the powers of the courts.
And I think this is one of them, and I think that it's probably appropriate that this proceeds to full trial so that all of the evidence can be laid out. Much of that, I hope, will be made public, and then we will have a better sense of what the evidence was against Mr. Dong that led to his inevitable sort of departure from the Liberal caucus. So it's good. I think that it's actually good that this is proceeding to trial and hasn't been shut down at this point. And we're going to have a better and a more clearer understanding of what happened here and what the sources were as a result of that. But because this is now before trial and we don't want to get sued, I think that we can't really say very much about it. Except to note that this is what happened, and then to try and give listeners some context to what an anti-SLAPP motion is and what it means, and most importantly, what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that Global was wrong.
We've joked before that our lawyers have like armed drones circling our houses, and we start talking about this stuff like a Hellfire missile goes through and knocks out our modem.
Yeah.
The only thing I would really add to kind of the federal wrap up, and again, you asked me before, Jen, what you missed. I don't think you missed anything, but something I would just kind of add. There is a by-election in Toronto coming up, and I'm already kind of dying inside because I hate talking about by-elections. This
by-election has taken on great symbolic import for people in politics.
No, it's a urban, like a deep heart of Toronto urban riding. It's been held by the Liberals since 1997. It's a pretty safe Liberal seat. It is mathematically, it is an accessible seat for Conservatives if the Conservatives are running the table. And anything less than that, it's a long shot riding for the Conservatives. But I would also point out
St. Paul's is pretty much the deep, dark heart of the Laurentian consensus, man. Like,
you can go a little bit further south and get more into annex territory, but you're on the border.
You're on the border. It's like
Mordor, St. Paul's,
basically. Annex is Mordor for an Albertan. This is what's the swamplands before Mordor is basically St. Paul's.
St. Paul's, to your point, Jenna, it's like swamplands of Mordor. And what I find interesting about all of this,
filled with the carcasses of long dead and long hopeful Conservative candidates. It's like the little lights go up at night. Sorry.
I would normally not expect the Conservatives to win this. And to be honest, I make no predictions about what's going to happen. I don't know. By-election polling is wonky. I don't put any money on the outcome on Monday, but both my Liberal and Conservative sources think the Conservatives are going to win it. And the Liberals are terrified by that. And the Conservatives aren't universally thrilled about it either. And I know, are they going to take the win? Sure. But I think they would have almost weirdly preferred a really neck and neck second place finish, because now they have a seat in the heart of Detroit. They're going to have to defend in about a year with money and volunteers and effort. They probably would have done all the same damage to Justin Trudeau by finishing half a point behind and let the Liberals tear themselves to pieces because they almost lost the seat. And the Conservatives don't need to drop $100,000 defending it for the next election.
Okay, but
that's me being cynical.
Here's the weird thing about St. Paul's, and here's why we're talking about this in the first place, is because the rumor was originally that the Liberal caucus was highly, in a state of high unrest over the polling numbers, and that if they lost the literal swamplands of Mordor to the encroaching enemy from Gondor, in this case, if they lost St. Paul's to the Conservative Party, that would be such an indication of total distrust by the electorate that they were going to force Trudeau out. Like they would actually be mobilized by an outcome like that to force him out of his leadership. That was the rumor. So, but then it got a little weird because it started to sound like we're not quite sure who's playing this game here, like who's managing expectations, because it sounded like the Conservatives started to underplay their own expectations in this seat, maybe because they didn't actually want to win it for the reasons that you were saying. But then the Liberals started to underplay expectations in this seat, talking about how they were expecting the Conservatives to win it, maybe because they knew that they were going to win it, but they were trying to manage the expectations of the Liberal caucus so that if they overperformed in St. Paul's, that would quiet them through the summer and Justin Trudeau could stay on. So everybody's playing 4D chess over this by-election, and it's really very dysfunctional and funny.
This is my kind of 10,000 foot overview of it. And I've already written this for a Toronto Star column. I filed already, so a little bit of a spoiler here, but there's no good news for the Liberals here. Like, there isn't a good news scenario because they're either going to lose a seat that should be safe, or they're going to barely hold on to a seat that should be safe, or they're going to be relieved to have held a seat that should be safe. And none of that is good. And if you are either Justin Trudeau and you're like personally, and you're right on the edge of do I stay or do I go, you're not getting any good news on Monday night. And if you are a would-be mutineer in either the Liberal caucus or maybe the Liberal Party, like kind of the broader party infrastructure, fundraisers, money guys, things like that, you're not getting good news on Monday. You're getting bad news on Monday. So I tend to think no matter what happens is probably already baked in, but we have to go through the process. We have to let the votes be counted and see where they land.
In its process.
It's
also, if you want to know why I keep on making these Lord of the Rings references, it's probably because I'm being subconsciously cued by the highly elven style moonstone pendant that I bought in Hornby Island.
Yeah, I was really wondering.
That was where that's coming from. Anyway.
That was top of mind for me. You know what? You've got your Lord of the Rings pendant. I've got my Starfleet communicator and rank insignia.
Let's just embrace it. Fine. Put it on. Let's do it.
You know what point I would make to this, and then that kind of like completes the little bit. I'm going to talk some defense issues a little bit later in the podcast, but this will kind of finish off the medley, so to speak, on all of this. The Liberals were weird the last few weeks, and this is something we have talked.
They've been weird the last few months, man.
Especially weird the last few weeks. And we've made reference to this in podcasts already. Chrystia Freeland being like, we don't raise capital gains taxes, teenagers get pregnant, and Mark Holland saying the road trip you're planning will combust the atmosphere, and Mark Miller saying, I'm tired of people blaming immigrants for housing shortages. We're not. We're blaming you. Like, so this could be all that. I mean, the House rising and everybody going home, it was overdue and it was necessary, and I hope they all calm down. My personal assessment all along has been that Trudeau's not going anywhere, that no one's going to force him out, and that he's not going to quit. And 6 months ago, I was 95% confident in that. Today, I'm 75% confident on that. And after the Monday by-election result, I am open to revising my number up or down.
All right. That's good to know. I mean, the other rumor is that like he's going to go early July. And but the thing is, timing wise, if he's going to go, he needs to go June, July, because you run out of runway if you do a leadership race before the next election if he doesn't go really within the next like 2 weeks.
Okay, but let me throw a curveball at you.
So maybe he's just waiting for the St. Paul's election to sort of see where that calculus goes.
There is a scenario where he does not have to go that quickly.
No.
I don't think the Liberals are there yet, but I'm going to lay out a scenario where he can go kind of whenever if they fundamentally as a party accept that they have lost the upcoming general election whenever it lands, they have to ask themselves a strategic question. Do we try to put in a full-time leader now, and that full-time leader, Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, Anita Anand, whomever, their first major political development as Liberal leader is a crushing defeat? Or do they write off the next election, save whatever furniture they can with either Justin Trudeau or an interim leader, and then try to figure out the path forward after the next election? I don't think they've made any decisions about that. I've had no indication that they're even thinking in those terms yet. But the Prime Minister's timeline doesn't matter if they decide they're, well, to be blunt, that they're fine.
Right.
Because then he could leave in a month. He could leave a month before the... If they give up on the next election and start thinking about a post-election recovery strategy, they have more options in terms of timelines.
Speaking of saving the furniture, I want to start talking about Bill C-59, but I think first we should encourage people to like and subscribe to The Line. Like and subscribe, both on YouTube, right there in that button, or come to our Substack at www.readtheline.ca and check out what we have to offer in written content. You will enjoy it if you enjoy this podcast.
All I add to that is I just like saying it. Like and subscribe.
This episode of The Line has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada, which is dedicated to helping Canadians who are looking to quit smoking understand the full range of options available. Despite decades of government programs and regulations, today nearly 5 million Canadian adults smoke cigarettes. Adult smokers who choose to continue to smoke should be aware that other options exist. Right now, accessing information about these options is heavily restricted in Canada. While not risk-free, alternatives such as heated tobacco and vaping products provide a potentially less harmful choice than cigarettes. Cigarettes burn tobacco, resulting in smoke that contains 6,000 harmful chemicals that are associated with smoking-related disease and death. Heating tobacco and vaping products have the potential to significantly reduce this risk. Health agencies around the world are now considering these alternatives to help end smoking. Updated laws can help adult smokers better understand the full range of options available, including the relative risk of these products. Millions of Canadians smoke cigarettes. Technology exists that can help change that, but policymakers need to take action. Learn about how a smoke-free future can be achieved at unsmoke.ca.
Okay, so we hope you've liked and subscribed because we've prompted you. Jen, we're now run with a couple of federal stories. We're each going to cover one of them. It's not really related to the House needing to rise or anything like that. We didn't even get into the fact that, actually, I probably should have mentioned in the last segment. One thing you did miss was for about a week there was hope in Liberaldom because there had been one good poll for them. And then like a bunch of others came out and just the good poll was a blip. Right. Like the trend line hasn't changed. If anything, it's worse. It looks like Trudeau's floor is dropping, so it's just bottoming out under him. But you wanted to talk, we keep getting the number wrong. Bill C-59. Yes, and so we're enunciating that carefully.
You can guess which number I keep on mistaking it for. So Bill C-59. Now, this one is causing all kinds of drama here in Alberta, and I think I need to get into the context to explain why. C-59 is a dog's breakfast of an omnibus bill that was sort of hastily passed through the Senate right at the moment when everybody was ready to go home for summer. So this whole thing, if you read through it, is an absolute shambolic mess that it looks to me or reads to me like every closely connected client of every reasonably well-paid lobbyist in Ottawa managed to get like their client's favorite clause in here just before the House rose and the Liberal government disbanded for the summer ahead of the next election. So this was probably the last opportunity to get your little favorite tidbit into a bit of bill. And I'm going to read you a little bit of the little bit of how this thing is reading in full. An absolutely enormous bill, but like summary. Included in this bill are things like limiting the deductibility of net interest and financing expenses by certain corporations and trusts consistent with certain Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and the Group 20 Base Erosion and Profit Shifting project recommendation. To
scintillating.
Providing a refundable investment tax credit for qualifying businesses for eligible clean technology equipment. to exempting certain fees from refundable tax applicable to contributions under retirement compensation agreements, to allowing vaping product licenses to import packaged vaping products for stamping by the licensee and entry into the Canadian duty-paid market as of January 1st, 2024, to authorize the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada to disclose designated information to the Department of the Environment and to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, subject to certain conditions. Like, it's one of these bills that when you read it, you absolutely can understand why nobody actually read it very carefully, because it was clearly just meant to be like a Play-Doh of all the little tidbits and tiny little fixes and recommendations. They just crammed it into one giant bill and then rammed that sucker through before they went home. But included in this mess of legislation was this little provision, this change to the Competition Act. And the change to the Competition Act is in in 236 subsection 74.1b2, quote, makes a representation to the public with respect to the benefits of a business or business activity for protecting or restoring the environment or mitigating the environmental and ecological causes or effects of climate change that is not based on adequate and proper substantiation in accordance with internationally recognized methodology, the proof of which lies on the person making the representation. Okay, so Alberta's flipping out over this.
I just felt my soul depart my body.
Right. So Alberta's flipping out of this, and the reason why is because what that section does in plain language is that it says if you are going to make claims that your business is doing something positive for the environment, like reducing emissions, you need to be able to prove that to a standard of international methodology, which isn't spelled out, to an entity that isn't clarified, and to a standard that isn't really clear. And as a result, we have Pathways, which is a consortium of 6 oil sands companies in the company. You've got Imperial Oil. You've got anybody who works with oil emissions in this country, radically pulling back all of their environmental messaging, pulling back all of their claims about what they're doing in terms of carbon capture or emissions reduction, because they're not sure if any of that is legal by the letter of this law, because there's no clarity in this law about whether or not the case. And of course, you've got people like Catherine McKenna or Environmental Defense coming out being, woohoo, this is proof that all of your environmental claims are complete bullshit, because now that you know that it's illegal to make bullshit claims, you're just not saying anything. And you've got all the people who actually understand what's going on saying, not necessarily. What's clear here is that this law isn't written clearly or well or to a standard that anybody can interpret meaningfully. And as a result, all of these companies are just pulling back everything because they don't know what's legal for them to say about their environmental initiatives. I mean, even this statement, in accordance with internationally recognized methodology, it's not written in this legislation which internationally recognized methodology they're even holding this language to, right? So it's another pretty clear example of part 20 in a series. Liberals don't write legislation good. Your legislation not written good. Bad legislation is written badly. That isn't clear. And so a lot of these companies are just saying, like, in the absence of any kind of clarity or certainty about what's legal for us to publish, we're going to say nothing. But what's also not clear is, like, what is the body that's going to adjudicate whether or not these environmental claims are truthful or not? By what standard? What will be the punishment for failing to meet that standard? Like, none of that is clear in this legislation. So presumably this is going to be another one of these classic examples of bad legislation written badly. We'll just get we'll just sort it out in the regs, and what will probably happen is that the regs will fall to the Competition Bureau to figure out. But until there's any kind of clear regulatory structure for this legislation, all of these companies are just doing the giant shruggy emoji and saying, well, we don't know what to do, so we're just going to pull back on everything. So look, I mean, oil sands companies and energy companies aren't particularly sympathetic protagonists in this particular play. My suspicion is that what's happened here is, I don't know if you remember this, we wrote about this back in February. You had NDP MP Charlie Angus put forward this private members bill, which I believe was Bill C-372, where he said basically he wants to outlaw all energy sector advertising.
Energy sector
and
advertising.
He explicitly in the preamble of the bill said, I want this treated like misleading tobacco advertising and just have it all banned. My suspicion is that, well, I mean, the private members bill was obviously nuts and I don't think would seriously pass Parliament. But what I think has happened here is that knowing that this private members bill was absolutely going to die on the order paper and was going to go nowhere, somebody within the monstrous liberal apparatus managed to finagle these two clauses, take the idea of that bill, finagle these two clauses into this omnibus bill, and get it like put in the bill in such a way that nobody was seriously going to read it. Because I mean, this bill went through the Senate even without debate, and I think these particular clauses were added like in third reading at one point. So I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. I'll double check. But like this, somebody managed to finagle these two clauses into this as a dog's breakfast of an omnibus bill. Didn't really give it particularly careful thought or reading, and then it just sailed through the Senate. So now it's law, but nobody really has a clear understanding of what that means or how it can reasonably be enforced, which is a pretty classic example of how the Liberals govern nowadays. And regardless of what you think about a law sort of banning greenwashing, which is effectively what this was intended to do, I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with truth in advertising standards. I think that's fine. But a law sort of holding energy companies to a truth in advertising standards, that should be a standalone law. That shouldn't be in an omnibus bill. That should be a standalone law where the expectations are clearly laid out, and there's a straightforward and clear method for saying what's illegal, what's not illegal exactly, by what standards you're holding it to, what methodology you're holding it to, and what the consequence. And is this a proactive thing? Or is this a reactive type of an approach? Like that should be a standalone law that is in and of itself subject to committee and scrutiny. It shouldn't be something that gets shoved into an omnibus bill, third reading, and then sailed through the Senate like a couple of days before everybody rises to go home for summer. Like that's ridiculous that they're doing this in this way. That's not an appropriate process for this type of a law. But then I hear also getting a lot of people who are just absolutely crazy from the Alberta side who are claiming, well, this is just a malicious attempt by the Liberal government to shut down the oil sands and kill our carbon capture and storage technology thing. Well, yeah, except for in the exact same law, there's also language about providing labor and tax credit for clean technology and carbon capture and storage. Like that's how confused this whole thing is. So it's just weird. It's another example of just bad government, bad written legislation, passing down the consequences of poorly written legislation onto some kind of regulatory body who are just forced to sort it out later. And entire industries just going, what is happening here? I don't understand. And when they do that, I think the same thing that in omnibus laws, I think, do the same thing to the Liberals as they did to the Harper government. They erode public trust in the whole process and the whole system. Because the whole thing reads like you're trying to pull one over on the public. You're not doing this in an open and transparent way that gives us the opportunity to debate and take a look at these things. So you have an entire industry out here in Alberta that has no faith in the government that is now operating to oversee them, and is now saying it's now operating under these really kind of conspiratorial assumptions about what this government is doing and why it's doing it. And my position to this is my position to them on this is, I think incompetence just explains 99% of this. I think there's no one in charge right now. And I think everybody who had any access to anybody who was drafting this legislation got their favorite client's little clause stuck in this bill. And I think that the lack of control at the top is what allows that to happen and trickle down. And I think that's where we're at with this government. I think there's nobody in charge. There's nobody helming the top to make sure that these sorts of things are managed effectively. But that means that you're getting really weird legislation that's now coming down the pipe that isn't being properly scrutinized or approached in the appropriately serious way. So that's kind of my ramble on C-59. I don't think it is quite what a lot of the energy industry in Alberta is claiming it is, because I think a lot of them have as I've said, have bought into their reading incompetence as malice. And I think that they're assuming malign intent from a federal government, when I think just sheer disorganization and chaos explains what's happening a lot better. And I think that you have the Liberals falling back into their old habits of like no right legislation good, your legislation no clear, and trying to fix this at other orders and other levels of government.
We've talked about this before. I got a couple specific points to make, but we've talked about this before, and we coined the term bad governmenting.
Bad governmenting. Yes, this is bad governmenting.
It's just bad governmenting. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you're right. We've seen this before. I think we've also talked about legislating for the vibes, where, we want, there's a signal to a stakeholder group or a demographic block or an electoral segment or whatever. So we're going to put something in legislation that sounds vaguely like what they want to hear.
Yep.
And we're going to put a big tick on the checklist next to that item. And then we're going to fundraise. We're going to hammer that group for donations, but we're going to leave it up to some other people later to figure out what the fuck we've actually just made the law. And you were saying a few minutes ago that you don't think this should be handled as an omnibus measure. I actually don't care if it's an omnibus. I don't like omnibuses on the face. So I have a general dislike for omnibus. But I think the bigger failure is government by eventual regulatory clarification. And even, I don't care if it's in an omnibus bill or not, don't pass laws until you have figured out the regulatory implementation of that. Because to your exact point, it just creates uncertainty here. And like an incumbent political party fundraising off the vibes ought to be a secondary priority to having a coherent set of laws and regulations by which we are governed. But
it isn't. Well, okay, so here's my issue with omnibus laws here. And I think that I'm going to try and explain this in really global terms. And we've talked a bit about how Canada is increasingly an octopus economy, right? This is an economy that more and more private businesses are slowly becoming entrenched and dependent on the federal government, and their ability to succeed in the regulatory environment that we've created for ourselves is a contingent on their ability to navigate an increasingly Byzantine federal government. So either their ability to hire the right lobbyists or their ability to find an in a particular department so that they can get on
a hyper-specialized advisors like accountants.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or their ability to get on particular lists that gives them privileged access to government contracts.
Sure, like approved vendors
and stuff. And so it's increasingly, you have I think part of our productivity problems in Canada is that a lot of private companies are now spending a lot of money and time actually navigating the federal government in order to make a profit rather than serving the public. Right? Like their incentives have all been twisted and made perverse. And I call that the octopus economy. And it's part of the big issues that I have with a lot of what we're doing in the media industry in order to keep ourselves afloat. I don't include us and us because we actually don't take government money and never will. Like and subscribe at the line. But that's what we're essentially creating. So my issue with these omnibus bills is that if you read between the lines of a lot of them, there are ways for a lot of these companies and the insiders they've hired to help them navigate the octopus economy to get their preferred little treatments and tax credits and perks through government without appropriate scrutiny and oftentimes without appropriate understanding from the people who are actually governing. Like, I'm willing to bet the 99% of the people who voted to pass Bill C-59 don't have the first understanding of what, how should I say this? Oh, I'm just going to pick one at random. Ensuring that only genuine intergenerational business transfers are excluded from the anti-surplus stripping rule in Section 84.1 of the Income Tax Act. What percentage of the people who voted through Bill C-59 understand what that clause means?
Rounding error
right
next to zero.
That's right. So who put it in there? Who benefits by it? That's never going to get...
Someone who had the ear of the relevant minister and was owed a favor promised staffers or donors at the next election.
That's right. And it's never going to get scrutinized. It's never going to get picked apart. The implications are never going to get examined because we all know that this is just... It's pork barreling, right? They're pork barreling. Somebody's benefiting from that clause. We have no idea who. And it's never going to get examined in committee. It's never going to get talked about. It's never going to get picked apart because it's getting the cover of the omnibus bill. It's just too long, it's too complicated, and whatever. It's summer, it's June, I want to go home. Pop it through. That's my issue with this, is that the omnibus bills and the increasing reliance of governments on omnibus bills is indication of a kind of a corrupt octopus economy that Canada is creating around itself. That's what's messed up about all of this.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree with that. I think in theory it's possible to have a well-written omnibus bill, but I think omnibus bills are a place where shitty ideas can have maximum obscurity and maximum invisibility.
That's right.
So I agree with you in practice. I'm just saying in theory, a properly written omnibus bill that fixed a bunch of problems in an appropriate, correct way, I'd have no objection to it. But that, you're right. That's not what they're used for.
That's not what they're used for. Like I said, yeah, sure. If there's a lot of like little technical fixes, this should be an and or an or in this legislation. Like you can use them to efficiently pass technical fixes. But in fact, I think that at this point, I don't. Omnibus bills are an abuse of the democratic process, and they're an abuse of the democratic process when Harper sort of started to use them really heavily, and they're an abuse of the democratic process when the Liberal government uses them. And there'll be an abuse of the democratic process under a Conservative government too, because I'm not naive about how that's going to work.
In the next 18 months or so, the Liberals will resume thinking they're bad.
Right.
In the meantime,
here we go.
Here we are. So speaking of kind of government dysfunction, there was an interesting comment made by Anita Anand earlier in the week, and I'm paraphrasing this here. The CPAC audio is available, but it was in the middle of a scrum in Parliament and the bells were ringing. So the audio quality was terrible. So let me paraphrase here. There's been a lot of talk, particularly while you've been gone, about the NATO 2% target, Canada coming under a lot of pressure, and increasing signs that at least the government is thinking about hitting the target. Now, we know this government, there's deliverology problems, and knowing them, they'll probably try to backload all the spending in 5 years out. They probably won't be the government when it happens. So caveats abound and exceptions apply. But it does look like they are thinking about moving towards the 2% target. And Anita Anand, who used to be the defense minister, but now she's the president of the Treasury Board, in the scrumming, she made a really good point. And I'm paraphrasing this because the audio is terrible. But she basically said one of the problems we have right now is that the military it's not the military as a fighting force, but defense as a ministry can't spend the money we're already giving it. So if we budget a big spending bump, she didn't use this term, but what she's describing is basically bureaucratic inability. A lot of that money isn't going to get spent. And in fact, we're already budgeting too little money to to defense, and we're not even spending all that we budget because the government can't, just for, again, basic civil service deliverology problems, it cannot move the money out the door. It takes so long to do the program initiatives that we want defense to be doing. And that can be operational stuff. It can be training stuff. It can be equipment procurement, that we can't spend the money because we're budgeting it in 12-month increments, but it takes us longer than 12 months to do stuff.
Right.
So that was the point she made. And I've said it more bluntly than she did, but that was her point, and I agree with it. So I give a full shout out to Minister Anand here for accurately identifying a major problem we have. Mm-hmm. But then she went out and she proposed completely the wrong solution, where she said, what we need to do is we need to fix some of the staffing, and we need to staff up like the relevant specialties so that we have enough people, enough bureaucrats on hand to actually execute the policy initiatives. One of the things like that to me is like correct diagnosis, literally the wrong solution. Now, I'm not saying this out of some reflexive, we spend too much on government, smaller government. Like, this is not just some reflexive right-wing rant here. But what we have in defense is continually and increasingly dysfunctional policies and goals that we are attempting to keep pace with by throwing more and more bureaucrats and consultants at it. Simplifying the processes doesn't seem to occur to anyone. And I had this fascinating conversation, because I go to the Halifax conferences every year, where you bring a ton of defense experts from all over the world. And this was not only a Canadian problem. This was mentioned by some of the other militaries. But basically, the Western Alliance has decided that we're going to arm Ukraine. And we've basically said to the Ukrainians, what do you need? They say, we need this. We buy it for them, and then we give it to them. Now, there's problems with that. There's production delays and things like that. But it is the simplest possible procurement. What do you need? Let's get that.
Right.
In a lot of the allied militaries, and Canada might be one of the worst at this, It's, oh, the military needs a new vehicle, or we need a new artillery system. Okay. Which of the companies that can provide us is going to offer us the maximum financial benefits in electorally important ridings in Canada? How can we take, oh my goodness, we're going to spend $10 billion on this new program. My God, that's a lot of money. We can win a lot of votes with that. So we need to put a little bit in this riding. We need to put a little bit in that riding. We need to make sure the Quebec shipyard gets some, so we can't leave the Irvings out. And this just begins this process where I've made this point before. If you want to understand what's wrong with Canadian military procurement, you have to understand it's actually not a military procurement system. It is a regional economics development program. And it is also, more bluntly, a cash distribution program for favored business interests.
And that's where we go back to what we were talking about earlier, the octopus economy, which is what we've established.
So basically,
the purpose of a thing is what it does. The purpose of the federal purpose of the purpose of a thing is what it does. The purpose of a federal government is this. It's not to actually procure military equipment or to govern people. The purpose of the thing is to continue the overcomplication of itself in order to favor the people who know how to navigate increasing and more Byzantine complication.
We call it a military procurement system, but it is a cash distribution program and a regional economics benefit development agency, just like we have officially in almost every part of the country.
Right.
The federal government operates regional or provincial development agencies to funnel federal cash through to favored interests in specific discrete regions of the country. We also have a defense procurement system, which basically does the same thing. During Afghanistan, when our troops were dying for lack of equipment, the Harper government, to its credit, when we need this, and we're going to buy it as fast as we can, we are going to exchange cash for equipment. And wouldn't you know it, we had that stuff in the field in months or years, like a relatively compressed timeline. And one of the things I was just hearing in Halifax was this frustration from defense officials, civilian or uniformed, from Canada, but also from allies, going, why are we so much better equipping the Ukrainians than we are our own units? Because it goes through a different bureaucracy.
Right. So the answer, understanding that the octopus economy exists to further complicate itself, the answer to the system is not to hire more bureaucrats in order to further complicate itself even more. Right? And I mean, this is something we talked about at our Edmonton event, and Lisa Raitt made this point as well.
Yeah.
There's radically more people in the federal civil service than makes sense. And part of the reason why things aren't working appropriately and why we're seeing this sclerosis is because sometimes the more people in a system doesn't make the system better run. It makes the system less efficient and less better run because it disperses accountability among other reasons.
There's that old expression I love. The bureaucracy is expanding to meet the needs of the expanding bureaucracy. It's just like it is a completely circular process that just drives things into the ground. You know, there's this great anecdote I tell. I'm not gonna get all the details right, but I've written about this before. In the written dispatch, I'll link to it. Around the same time, just over 10 years ago, the British Armed Forces and the Canadian Armed Forces both realized they needed new 9mm pistols. It was a coincidence, but basically there was a recognition that both countries, their pistols were wearing out and we needed new ones. And the British made the same thing. And by incredible coincidence, we also decided we needed roughly the same number. And because it's all NATO standard, there were different possible manufacturers, but the pistol was going to be functionally the same. And the British basically said, all right, it's going to cost us like 10 million pounds. It's going to take 2 years. We're going to buy 25,000 of these things. And they allotted the money. They purchased the pistols. They signed a contract with a known manufacturer. The pistols were provided, and the British were distributing the pistols to their frontline units in 24 months. Canada established an initial operating budget that was larger than what the British actually spent in the end, and established a 10-year project timeline.
10 years to buy pistols.
And I made the point at the time, you can't do it anymore because some of the gun control changes. A lot of military equipment is bespoke. A 9mm pistol isn't.
Right.
I have a license, which before the recent handgun freeze, I could have walked into the local gun store and bought what the British and the Canadians ended up going with. They went with different ones, but they're both available on the civilian market.
So, I mean,
this is not something that has to be made on some like boutique assembly line that only exists. Pistol.
So here, I think this is a point that we just want to make because I mean, you're a military buff, you're a defense buff, and this is kind of your wheelhouse, and this is why this stuff drives you crazy in particular.
Takes a toll on me.
But the problem is the issues with military procurement are the issues with the government. Like it's just a symptom of the same problem of this government. It's why we can't get shit done. It's why we can't get shit built. It's why we can't do anything effectively or efficiently or at scale anymore. And that's why increasingly we have a government that's hyper-fixated on boutique niche programs, boutique tax credits, narrowly focused dental benefits, school programs that are going to be underfunded. Like it's why the scope of ambition has become narrower and smaller, and we've become less and less capable of executing on relatively more and more minor ideas and programs, right? So anyway, I mean, what happens in military procurement, if you can understand why military procurement is such a shit show in Canada, you can understand, I think, broadly speaking, what every level of government more or less deals with in this country now. That's why shit doesn't get done. But
every
anyway,
day is a gift.
On that note, like and subscribe to the line. We're going to go into provincial politics next.
Like and subscribe.
So, Matt, I do want to do the rounds here in the various provinces, the regions, so to speak. We have had some well-targeted reader complaints about our neglect of British Columbia. Your complaints are noted and correct. You are based, sirs. We have, in fact, neglected British Columbia politics. Like so many other national journalists before us, it does sort of seem to be that once you get the mountains are like a magical divide where political interest more or less dies, which is inappropriate because it sounds like there's a lot of drama happening in British Columbia. I do want people to know we have contracted with a BC writer to do some stuff for us for the BC election. We are going to see some stuff coming out of there fairly soon. Good writer. I think it's going to be exciting. So yes,
a good writer
I'm not
too.
going
I'm
to pretend or try to.
I'm happy for this.
I'm not going to try and parachute into BC and pretend that I'm an expert in their internal politics. Although if I move to the islands, I might become one. But we are going to have some content. Yes, but I do want to move to Alberta very briefly,
Absolutely.
Simply because I think it's worth noting that the Alberta NDP is set to crown its new leader on Saturday. We are widely expecting... Yeah, exactly.
You know what? I totally forgot about that, but yeah, of course, you're right. We are expecting to not be surprised
by that. We are expecting Naheed Nenshi to sweep it and maybe on the first ballot. If it is an interesting race, believe me, we'll be talking about it. Matt, when we first announced Nenshi's candidacy, I will admit that I was not skeptical of his ability to win, but skeptical of whether or not he was actually the right guy for that job, and skeptical of his motivations. Like, why was he running for that? What was motivating him to do that? Again, I'm not surprised of his ability to win. The people he was running against weren't particularly well known. The one candidate who I think was actually very much the star of the show, who wasn't Nenshi, was Jody Calahoo. I believe I'm going to mispronounce her name. I'm going to apologize. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Jody. Calahoo. Yeah, it is Jody Calahoo's Stonehouse. Every time I saw that woman in a debate, I thought she just rocked it. Just incredibly charismatic. Very, very good. I think she's going to be someone to watch in Alberta politics and maybe national politics coming up, because I believe she was the only Indigenous person in the race. And I thought that she was really, really passionate, particularly around water issues. So my suspicion, and I think everyone's suspicion, is that she was running in order for a cabinet seat around environment. Was her long-term goal there. But
is she representing like a rural, heavily Indigenous riding, or is she in one of the big cities now?
I believe she'd have to run for a particular area, okay. But I think she's a powerhouse, and I think she's going to be someone to watch in politics over the next few years. So put a pin in that. And now...
Yeah, talk. If you want to invite her on for a chat, invite her on
the other
on the line or something.
Obviously, is Naheed Nenshi is probably going to assume power here. It's going to be interesting to see how he manages and how he manages the party caucus and how he manages being an opposition leader. It's a very different kind of political role than what he was used to as a mayor. So I'm just really interested to see where that goes.
You know what kind of like, sometimes I have things to say about Alberta politics. This isn't one of them. I'm just here to make friends. So Well, I'll wait to see what happens, and obviously, congratulations to whomever the winner is, and all the best. Effective opposition is a key part of democracy, and I don't care
Fair enough.
who's the next premier of Alberta. So it's like, to me, it's just like, great, like, sure, like, have fun, everybody. Like I said, I'm just here to make friends. It's been am I correct in this? Like, this might be me just being clued out here in the six, but did this start off with a race that there was like a lot of attention on,
I think it was
but
sort of the
then she
opposite.
came in
I sort of
and
think there was very
you know,
little attention on the race, specifically because the
interesting. Okay.
outside of Alberta politic nerds, the candidates themselves weren't particularly high profile or well known. And then she came in and was like, oh,
Well,
okay,
more
but yeah, I
describing
mean,
my
and
own
then
tanking
she came
interest
in, and all of a
rather
sudden
than-
he's was essentially the highest profile figure. You can't beat Nenchi's name recognition. I mean, I think I had talked to someone about this. The amount of money that you would have needed to spend to beat Nenchi's name recognition alone was in the tens of millions. Like, he's a household name in Alberta. I think that's safe to say. And he's a household name? No, but I mean,
He's a
like,
household.
people know
I
who
wouldn't
he
say
is
he's a
across the
household
country.
name here, but I know who he is.
Yeah, the profile that he
I don't know
built
who
as
the mayor of
Calgary
Halifax
was phenomenal and maybe unprecedented. And also, I would say the mayor of Calgary, that it traditionally is a seat. I mean, that's also where Ralph Klein came out of as well, right? There is a bit of a runway there into other kinds of political futures. Very well connected guy. So yeah, I think that expecting anybody else, no matter how qualified, to be able to come in and compete with tens of $1 million of built up name recognition was a really, really hard sell. And also, I think there was a general sense, guy can fill a room. That was really clear from an early point. His political support is interesting from what I can see the room that he's filling. It's the sort of people who you would generally would fill a room for an Alberta Liberal or Alberta NDP crowd. It's older, it's whiter. It's more urban kind of downtown. It's the sort of people who kind of you would not necessarily mistake, or you could easily mistake them for the sort of people who are living in the annex, Mordor. That's what you were saying. You know what I mean? Like, no, I'm kidding about Mordor.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't take the Mordor joke seriously.
I believe exactly. The agreed upon descriptor became Mordor.
Now. Please don't take it personally. No. Just, I'm joking.
Oh no, who would? I'm gonna go have a nice long bubble bath and think
but no,
of you all in Calgary.
that is the crowd, and that's also the crowd that votes. So how many people are they in Alberta? Can he actually run a competitive campaign on a provincial level? I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be really interesting. It's been fascinating to watch Alberta over the last more than 10 years that I've been here go from a one-party system to a two-party system. That's what's happening right now. So it's really kind of interesting to watch that.
Well, I was actually going to ask you that.
I think it
is. So
yeah.
I want to put that question to you. Is it, or has the NDP improved its strength to the point where they have evolved from never being competitive in elections to consistently losing competitive elections?
I think they could have.
Are they actually in a position where they can start?
I think they could have won the last election if they'd run a better campaign. I think they ran a really, really flawed campaign. But I mean, if you look at their fundraising totals, like, I think they're still out fundraising the UCP. Like, there's money in the bank there. They are a competitive party. So I think that they had reached the limit of where they could go with Rachel Notley, and it was pretty clear that she needed to resign or she needed to step down. Like, that time for her was over. But I think with somebody who's got Nenchi's name recognition and their coffers, yes, they absolutely could be a competitive party to the UCP. There is no reason why Alberta can or should go back to a one-party state. But we're going to see Nenchi's leadership chops really be tested. And I think that this is where his personal motivations are going to matter, and his interpersonal skills are going to matter a lot. I mean, his capacity for policy is not in question. I think that he's got a really good analytical, policy-driven mind. So his ability to compete on that front, I think, is absolutely solid. But I think that both of Danielle Smith, the current premier, and Naheed Nenshi have interesting interpersonal flaws that are fascinating foils to one another. So it's going to be a great race. The next election is going to be baller, I think.
Yeah, I mean, my update from Ontario is briefer. The legislature rose in Ontario a few weeks ago now. It's going to be a long break. It's going to be like a 19-week break. There's been a lot of speculation that Doug Ford's going to go for an early election for various reasons. I don't care. I'm going to worry about that later. I'm not going to spend any time on the podcast talking about that yet. I'll talk about it more as it becomes more of a live issue. I do want to mention one Ontario issue though, and it's one I'm only going to use to make a broader point because I don't think every listener is going to care about this. But the LCBO, the provincial alcohol wholesaler, for lack of a better term,
I may not be able to take a bubble bath, but at least I can get drunk at 2 o'clock in the morning. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, at which point you may just decide to take the bubble bath. Should be taking.
Oh, that joke.
So the union has.
That was a proper pun, though. Come on now, bubbly bath.
Yeah, it was not bad. Attempting to be professional. The union representing the LCBO has voted overwhelmingly for a strike. And some of the issues are the issues you'd expect. Cost of living crisis, inflation. They want larger than normal wage increases to kind of restore purchasing power. There had also been a very controversial and ultimately struck down by the courts bill the government had passed to limit public sector wage growth. That's been repealed now. So the union's making the case, hey, look, like we got a cost of living crisis and we had been unconstitutionally deprived of proper inflationary raises before. So pay up. I think the union has a point on that one. You know, I mean, I'm not a union negotiator, but I think they have like a fair on the face of it argument that they are owed a big pay bump on that front. They also have some arguments that I don't agree with. So Ontario is in the middle right now of a fairly significant series of reforms to where the public can buy alcohol. So at long last, we'll be able to buy a 6-pack of beer at a convenience store. You know, Ontario is joining the late 20th century. So the union's saying, well, we want guaranteed job protections, even as the entire liquor distribution system in the province changes. To which my response is, like, you have a fair case to make that you've been screwed on the wage front. But no, I don't want a long-term deal guaranteeing you a job when it may become clear in 6 months that your job is surplus. Anyway, doesn't matter. I'm not the guy doing the bargaining. What is interesting to me is that the union is saying they will strike. And they made a really interesting choice. They said they have arranged their strike to begin on July 5th at the earliest so that they wouldn't ruin the long weekend. And I think to myself, okay, that's an interesting signal. So I think even the union thinks that a strike would be popular here. And it made me start to think of something you and I have spoken about before in a couple of different contexts. The president of the CBC, Catherine Tate, you and I have said before, if you were to actually put like a conservative deep cover agent directly and personally answerable only to Pierre Poilievre in as president of the CBC, it would look and talk an awful lot like Catherine Tate. And if you were to consider, again, at the federal level, Pierre Poilievre running for an election sometime the next year or year and a half, if you were to look for a better issue that the public service unions could give him other than we don't want to come back to the office an extra day a week, you couldn't think of a better gift to give Pierre Poilievre running in a burn it all down kind of election campaign. And I'm thinking about the LCBO union. It's a long, hot, muggy summer in Ontario. We're just at the start of it. Doug Ford is a proven populist campaigner and he loves booze issues, which is funny because you want to know something most people don't know about Doug? He doesn't drink. He's not a drinker. But he knows the power of booze as a populist issue. That is why he is Premier Buck of Beer. And the LCBO wants to pick a fight with him at an exact moment when Ford is looking for populist crowd-pleasing measures, contemplating, apparently, an early election, and already in the process of changing where Ontarians can access their beer. I wrote a TVO column about this week, and my message to the LCBO workers is simply this. You have a legitimate case, guys, on some of these fronts. But going on strike at the start of a long and hot Ontario summer is exactly the kind of mistake a lot of people were smart enough to see the federal civil service unions making when they said, we don't want to go back to the office. It's exactly the kind of mistake Catherine Tate was making when she's like, I don't want to talk about my bonuses as I fire reporters. I don't think some of our, what I will call, broadly speaking, progressive or left-wing institutions understand the anger and frustration out there. If they're not careful, they're going to get steamrolled
by reality. I'm just saying, like, the one thing that you impression that you often get when you watch, for example, the federal NDP or some progressive parties here is that their sense of identity and self is really wrapped up in being outsiders who speak truth to power. The struggle. I think being outside of power is where they're actually comfortable. And so when they do get power, there's a tendency to self-sabotage.
I don't want to remember if we spoke about this on the air or off the air, and I'm just self-consciously saying that because I don't want to put any private conversations we had on the record. But I will note generically that I had been teasing you a few weeks ago, and you had taken it in good spirits about how you have a little bit of a self-destructive streak at times. Like every once in a while, you're like, it would be interesting to set this on fire. I've never had that mindset. I am programmed to be like stability, 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 stability. I have never understood the mindset of the fuck it all, burn it all down crowd. And I've never understood the mindset of those who are more comfortable out of power than in it. But I acknowledge that there are people for whom that mindset is real.
Well, because actually holding power requires moral compromise, right? And responsibility. No, but it requires. No, I'm saying
responsibility and
compromise of a practical sense. It requires moral compromise. It requires to some, because you're never going to get everything right, and you're never going to get everything right. Everybody, and so in order to get things done, you're going to need to shake hands with people you don't like, and you're going to need power is corrupting because it requires compromises, even when it's done by the best of people for the best of intentions for the best of reasons. There's a corrupting element to holding power, right? And people who are frequently motivated by left-wing politics are frequently, not always, but highly idealistic, highly motivated by the idea of like utopic visions around the world, highly motivated by correct and noble desires to make the world a more noble and moral place according to their lights. And they tend to be pretty righteous. Now, I'm generalizing very, very broadly, but I don't think that is an uncharitable assessment of what I generally see from left-wing people and parties. And I think that, it's also positive in a lot of stuff. It's good to have people who are motivated by high moral standards and all that. Like, this is good stuff. But it means that being in power is requires a compromise of these ideals, right? So I do wonder if there's an element of allowing righteousness to steer people right off a cliff. And I wonder if that is a subliminal or a subconscious impulse to self-sabotage because power is uncomfortable for people who are really idealistic.
I
don't know. It's a theory. I mean, maybe look, if you're in the left and you think I'm full of shit, call me full of shit in the comments. I don't know. It just sort of seems like you see this pattern over time.
Don't encourage them. No, what I would say, it's possible. And I'm not trying to blow you off with that. Like everything you've said is well-reasoned and well thought and well articulated. And I think
conservatives have their own pathologies.
It's the same pathology. That's why the Liberals have generally been more effective in this country as politicians. They're more comfortable with the compromise. Maybe. They have to be brokers. But I think if I'm going to reach for an existential explanation for all of this, I actually have a different one. So you're just back from vacation in the islands and you're glowing. Like I've made repeated reference to the fact that you haven't been this tearful in weeks. And it's not a criticism. The listeners and the viewers may not know this. Jen has just come off, and this is something she had responsibly communicated to me. Jen told me a couple months ago, I got to go dark for a bit. Like I got a ton of personal projects coming up. I got some family obligations coming up. And Jen needed me to take the reins a bit of the line so she could do that. Jen's back, and that's great because I'm taking next week off. Welcome back, Jen. I'm throwing you the keys. But I don't know where you are like emotionally right now, which is kind of a weird question. Sorry, we're getting to the deep stuff here. You're just back from vacation, which means I don't know how attuned to you are. That one of my meta theories right now that helps explain everything is that people are fucking pissed off. And that like kind of that society-wide baseline level of anger is higher than it normally is or has been. And I do not exclude myself from this. I am confessing, turning this into a little bit of a therapy session, I'm angrier as a person than I would have been 5 years ago. And part of what I think might explain some of what we're seeing politically, and it might also explain things like social media sites are picking up weird things like, oh, another brawl at a suburban Toronto mall, or road rage incidents are up. Like, the indicators we would look to in a society to check if we're more pissed off seem to be bearing out the fact that we're more pissed off. I think that's influencing our politics. I think everybody is angrier. And I think whether or not that's Poilievre and Trudeau not liking each other, and that comes across in their House comments, whether we've already talked about this earlier in the podcast, whether it's Freeland and Holland and Miller and others making bizarre statements in really stark apocalyptic, the world is ending terms. And then we kind of look at like some of the stuff where whether it's the public sector unions federally or maybe the LCBO provincially or the president of the CBC, some of this stuff, if you'll indulge me a historical reference, strikes me as like kamikaze tactics. I'm pissed off. I'm just going to fly the fucking plane into the side of their aircraft carrier. You know why? Because fuck them. And that's not a healthy instinct. This is not how we run a diverse federation.
Well, isn't it though?
But I think rather than going, my existential thought is not that they're uncomfortable with power. It's that a lot of people out there are angry and they want to have a fight. And if you wake up in the morning wanting to have a fight,
I don't know.
A pretty good chance you're going to find
I sort of operate by the meta theory that all human societies and individuals have a deep, unacknowledged bent towards self-destruction. Like we don't really like ourselves very much, and therefore we have a tendency to self-destruct on occasion or to do things that are highly self-destructive and then go, I don't know why I did that. Why did we do that? That made no sense. It's because a lot of this is motivated by unexamined impulses toward destruction and toward change. I think
power,
this is the opposite.
Stability.
This is the opposite. Your attitude.
I meant your attitude toward
power,
those
influence,
things,
and stability, and where you sit on the hierarchy of power, influence, and stability as well, right? And I think that societies kind of cycle through these periods of building and constructive periods to stable periods to self-destructive periods. And I just think that we're in that particular end of the Wagnerian cycle where we're realizing that a lot of the things that we built up either aren't working the way that we had expected them to, expectations being a problem, or are working exactly as they were expected to. They're just not working for the benefit of us. They're working for the benefit of the people who established them. And so that tends to set off a kind of a self-destructive cycle in politics and interpersonal relationships. And I think that's just
burning we'll fix that though.
Slightly revised capital gains
tax inclusion.
And that's when all of these relatively minor policy issues take on this weird existential vibe about them. It's why all of these relatively minor policy issues become culture war issues. It's why we fixate on culture war issues, because we're picking up on the destructive on a destructive chain. And like, I also come from the positions that I'm not necessarily. I think we have a tendency to regard destructive patterns and constructive patterns as good and evil. I don't think of them as that way. I think both of them are necessary in order for a society to be healthy and thrive. We do need to get angry at things sometimes when things aren't working. Sometimes power structures are established for the benefit of a narrow and select few, and you should be angry about that, and you should destroy that. Or they drift there eventually. Or they drift there eventually economy, through momentum and time. Some things need to burn down. And I say that with the full understanding that it's easier to burn things than to build things, and like you have to be able to transition back into a constructive cycle again once you finish the burning. But things are burning down now, and some of the things are burning down because they were old, decrepit, and non-functional. That is necessary. That is a necessary part of any thriving, ongoing human society. Things can't all stay the same forever and ever and ever and ever. So, that's kind of, again, my meta analysis of all of this stuff. And am I angry? No, I'm not. I'm kind of sad. I'm sort of reevaluating my expectations for my future and for the future of my children. I think that there's probably, as I get older, I'm probably going to get more and more weird and withdrawn and eccentric. And I've accepted that about myself. I've made peace with it. Like my elven pendant. No, like, that's fine. That's okay. But no, am I angry? No. Oh,
Do you know other people around you who are angry?
A lot of people are angry.
Have you noticed that, though?
But I think that's a stage of grief, right? We're in different stages of grief.
We might just be in different stages. Anyway, long story short.
I was a little bit like, I don't know if we really want to talk about the LCBO strike, but that took us to some really interesting places, so I'm glad we did. I think that is a very long, what?
You know what I'm glad about? I mostly drink local craft beers.
All right. Well, I'm really just pleased with my bubbly bath pun joke. I'm really pleased with myself about that. I think that was really funny. It was super good. All right.
Yeah,
on that note, like and subscribe to Line. We went a little long today, but I think that's okay.
Just good to have you back in. Nice to have you back in Calgary, but also good to have you back bathed in glorious bandwidth, if not bubbly or bubbles. So apologies again, everyone, for those technical issues last week. And just as a final note, we mentioned this in the podcast last week, guys. The freelancers are going on vacation, so the written publication at the rate at the Line has been slow this week, but we actually just had late this week a bunch of stuff come in. We are going to pivot to a summer publication schedule soon. We will give you an update on when that will be. We will continue the podcast during that time, though, because this is something Jen and I enjoy doing, and it is efficient in terms of time invested. But we do have some great content lined up, and we're going to be publishing it this week. We're going to have some fun stuff for you in July, but we are moving into silly season. When the house rises, we lie down, and we kind of need a bit of a break. So Jen's just back from a holiday. I'm going to take one next week, and then we'll kind of figure out a more stable, sustainable schedule for the summer. But we're loving these podcasts. Thank you for all your support. As we always say, like and subscribe, but if you can, leave us a review, share it with your friends, do everything you can to help our reach. The algorithms, yeah, nailed it. The algorithms like it when you give us a thumbs up, when you share it, when you leave a comment. So please do these things. Don't call Jen full of shit, though. That would be hurtful. And guys, have a fantastic weekend. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Today's podcast was brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Now is the time to modernize Canadian laws so that adult smokers have information and access to better alternatives. By doing so, we can create lasting change. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.